I want to stick with this theme of renewable penetration into power markets.
That's the reason we're located in these cities. Actually, if you look in the data, they did include 2 of our sites. And they didn't talk about it broadly, but they were on the list, and it actually said that 2 of our sites were 94% all carbon. And how they did it is they are treating it as if anything new that plugs into the grid, it must all come from the coal peaker plant. Well, under that same argument, that electric vehicle you just bought, that when you plug it in, it must all be coal also. So this measurement and this metric is totally unfounded. It's really not scientific. And for them to actually have done this data, they should have shown up at every site, asked good questions, actually looked at the data where it came from. But of course, it was much easier just to make broad strokes and say anything new plugged in, takes all carbon power. This is very anti-technology, because again, in the world we live in, as we grow and as we interact with each other more, whether it's through Bitcoin or whether it's through any other kind of technology, it's going to take more power. Also, we're grid connected. Why don't you start talking about the grids instead of Bitcoin? So it was very clearly a targeted approach. Nobody was talking about the several hundred megawatts in the same state that all of us are in that are hosting selfies, right, for social media. And why is it that selfies get treated better than Bitcoin? You have to look at, the utility that we provide. And I know everybody in this room, knows that utility, is worthwhile. And, there's clearly another agenda going on. So to that, it was just very poorly researched, really just a hit piece. And the data and the methods they used are just non-scientific.
Totally. Jamie, could you talk about the dynamics that are going on in West Texas? What's that load profile look like on the generation side, and where do you fit in?
Let me touch on something Zach just said, just to add to that. Poorly researched, I actually think that they talk to a lot of miners, and I was in a group chat on Telegram where everyone was saying, yeah, he called me, we had a great conversation, we talked for 2 hours. This guy did the work, and then he chose, to your point, he chose to deliberately take this agenda stance. And so you gotta ask the question, who is funding that? Who is urging him to take this stance after he's gone and talked to the community, heard about job creation, heard about targeting renewables, the industry's goals? I mean, we get more scrutiny than anybody, and so we're trying harder than anybody to locate next to renewable generation assets. I mean, it's a funding advantage. If you are burning coal, equity investors aren't going to give you any money. If you're located next to some nukes, that's awesome. Wind and solar out in West Texas, very different business model, but also it's a boost to the company because this is a national priority. People vote on this issue, and they want to fund businesses who are helping. So, to touch on your points, nuclear and hydro, it's such a great source for Bitcoin mining. It's consistent, it's always going, especially nuclear. You need someone to take that power. You don't want your nuke tripping. And so you got a Bitcoin mining load that's right there that can take that power. Even if it's 7 or 8 year old S9 rigs that don't make any money, you still have this big shock absorber that can absorb if there's a line trip or something like that on the grid. Wind and solar, we're built to go down. We're all about flexibility. And if you look at West Texas, you got a preview of the grid of the future. 87% renewable install, a lot of solar, a lot of wind, and we're out there doing rain dances and wind dances, praying for wind, and praying for a sunny day. Because when all that generation comes on, our price of power goes down. We're in the real-time market. We don't have a power purchase agreement, and our software is built to basically dance around the peaks and valleys of power as quickly as we can. Our developers in the audience, Wes Shaw, he's one of the smartest guys in the world, and he's built some really fast software that chases the weather patterns, and that is what the grid of the future looks like with lots of wind and solar. Is humans do not demand power when the sun is shining or when the wind is blowing. They don't put their finger out the window and say, oh, I'm going to turn on my microwave now. They demand it at the same times, usually right in the morning and at the end of the day. And sometimes the wind hasn't picked up and the sun has already gone down, and that's when you see a massive price spike. And so adding these volatility absorbing flexible mining loads into your power grid does 2 really great things. Number one is it sends a signal to the generation community that says, hey, we're here. We will buy power from you when it's the middle of the night and the wind is blowing 40 miles an hour and no one is using it. So you can go underwrite your wind farm and we will still buy that power. We are going to buy that power as a default behavior. And the other thing it does is when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, we're going to shut everything off. And what that does is it reduces that load and enables it so that prices can be lower for the rest of the grid community. And so these volatility shock absorbers is the right way to think about a Bitcoin mining load. It's an economically perfect consumer of electricity. It's all about price. We're not making widgets. We're not streaming the Kardashians into someone's house. All we're doing is converting electricity into Bitcoins. And so we can be perfectly flexible, oftentimes too flexible. This is some of the stuff that we're working on with the great people at ERCOT is when you have so much flexible load, it actually creates a whole different type of problem from the challenges that they're usually accustomed to facing. So one thing I'm gonna go a little off topic here and just say, Texas mining community, we got an opportunity to have a home that has an ideological alignment with our industry, okay? This is a liberty-loving state. They want their citizens to have maximum freedom and maximum property rights. We do not want to screw this up. So miners in ERCOT should register. They should help out the grid. They should talk to ERCOT. They should be honest and transparent because this place, Texas, is our ideological home and we belong there. And so anybody who's listening out there, you got mining load in ERCOT, get in touch with ERCOT, talk to them, start working on your software systems to give them what they need to control the grid, help the renewable energy transition coming out of West Zone. Let's all be good citizens.
I'm gonna start putting you on our YouTube videos instead of me.
I'll get a haircut.
I'll get a haircut.
Lee, have you seen the attitudes of folks change over time? Do you feel like we're making the right progress with folks adjacent to our industry or maybe the political forces that be?
It's a good question because a lot of people are thinking, where did this 1751 thing come from? There is a misconception that the Texas political class is just all open arms to Bitcoin mining. We helped create that misconception in a way by being very close to the governor, Senator Cruz, a lot of elected officials. But the Texas Senate is made up of elected officials who are great in a lot of ways, but they're older. I don't know how to say this. They're older. And they are a little bit more Luddite in their tendencies. And we've had a lot of trouble with the Texas Senate. The Texas House is younger, more innovative, more willing to have these kinds of conversations. So we'll not shy away from that. We've got trouble in the Texas Senate. The Texas Senate is run by, it's a little bit quirky, it's run by the Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who does not yet understand this. We had a meeting with him a couple months ago and all he wanted to talk about was FTX. And I brought my power people, my Bitcoin mining people, and we were not there to talk about FTX, but that's the only thing he wanted to talk about, and we had 15 minutes with him. Oh. So if that gives you a sense, we are still in a good position, but there are a lot of people in power that don't yet understand this, and they've spent about 30 seconds on it, whereas the rest of us have spent countless hours on it. So it's frustrating to think, well, how can you not, the data's there, and it's because they've only spent 30 seconds on it. It's not because they're not good people. It's just they have so many other demands of their time. So we're going to redouble our efforts specifically on the Texas Senate, on education, on raising money around PACs, and around bringing data-driven things like Texas A&M. We're bringing them in the picture, and a lot of other components to really make sure that in those 30 seconds we could make it crystal clear that this industry is going to be as big for Texas as the oil and gas industry has been for the last century.
Phenomenal. I love it, and I too have terrible opinions about things I don't know about, so what do? I go learn about them. Zach, I'm gonna pivot away from the ERCOT environment and talk a little bit, because your business looks a lot more like mine. We're in much more of sort of a utility-driven, rate case, rate class environment. we've gotten great feedback from some of our utility executives. I'm curious what your feedback has been from the utility side, because oftentimes I think they get it the fastest because they see the benefit directly.
Yeah, I think the biggest feedback is be aware of the community around you. Enter through the front door. That's the number one thing. When you come in with the utility to a city, make sure they know exactly what your plan is, make sure they know exactly what you're going to do, and also make sure that they know exactly what you're going to pay for. That's been one of the number one things. Is there's been a mindset, and unfortunately, all of us are coming with somebody that probably walked through the door before us, 5 years ago, and there was a lot of handouts being asked for 4 or 5 years ago. And I think that it's quite refreshing. We walk in the door, we engage with the community. As a public company, we're lucky. We have capital. We're able to put down cash deposits. We're willing to pay for part of the infrastructure. We're willing to do so happily, because then you have an ally forever in these communities as you add jobs, but also knowing that their citizens didn't have to pay for that line upgrade that you ran to your facility. We did. And you know what? Somebody's uncle was on the construction crew that put that line in. And that's what matters, is making sure everybody knows what really matters. Community engagement is the number one thing. So I walked into a utility company the other day, and that was one of the first things that came out. They said, I just want you to know, I understand how crypto mining works. Of course, the words they're using, because there was somebody that walked in at some point, right? And they said they had these asks. And I said, well, actually, I want you to understand what it is. And we went through the whole process. They had also never encountered another miner that wasn't building a site to host for somebody. So as we explained, hey, we're self-miners. We can be truly flexible. This is what we can offer. All the light bulbs started to go on, and they understood that we could solve real problems for them. And we actually don't have any plans necessary to build in that utility right now. We are planting the seeds, and the seeds really matter. And so that's what I would say. If you're going to go in and you're going to engage, don't try and surprise the utility. Don't try and buy a site and build it and then tell them, oh, by the way, I'm Bitcoin mining. Engage with them up front, because the education, to Lee's point, it's exactly what matters. Engage with your politicians, engage with the utilities, because what we're finding in Georgia, there aren't programs. There aren't these ancillary service programs. And we actually came from a background in the energy space in California, which has, they're very imperfect, but they have a lot of programs. To come into a state where they have nothing, there is no technology that's communicating back and forth from the grid. We are actually one of 2 companies that schedule with our grid provider, and we do so in the equivalent of an Excel spreadsheet. And they're very thankful for even that. They know whether we're going to be there or not 75 minutes in advance. This isn't a minute-by-minute process that more advanced grids happen. So again, it's making sure they understand what you can do, because they probably don't.
Yeah, I'm going to do final thoughts with these gentlemen in a moment, but I'll just offer an anecdote that we heard when inflation was peaking over 9%. One of the CEOs of a utility we work with, he said, when this macro environment changes, I have basically 3 options. I can raise prices, I can degrade services, or I can find a customer like a Bitcoin miner. And that's the whole playbook.
That's right. Yeah.
So, guys, this has been great. I'd love it if you could each offer a final thought around the role that mining plays and why grids love the coin, and then we'll get out of here.
We need more data. We need more data from reputable Tier 1 educational institutions. And we need to be, and I'm just going to echo what my colleagues to the left have said, we need to be more communicative with our grid operators. Because the days of trying to operate a 100-plus megawatt site in the shadows are way gone.
Doesn't work. Zach?
Yeah, I would say also too, as much as we all embrace technology, we're in a state in Georgia where nothing's better than, face-to-face conversation and a handshake. And I think that's the big thing too, is there's this perception of Bitcoin and Bitcoin miners, and there's not a lot of people involved. This is a business of people. We as people use Bitcoin. We are people that run the mines. And so making sure that they understand the real aspect of what Bitcoin is and how it affects people. That's how we interact with each other. That's what gets people to change their mind, make new decisions, is when they understand the face and the name behind it. So engage in person as much as possible with the people around you.
Perfect. Jamie?
I'm going to take a different approach. Generator integration. This is the secret sauce that's out there. Okay, you have this mining load. We all talk about curtailing in response to high prices. That's the big use case right now. But what you're starting to see more and more, and it's happening in West Texas a lot, is integrations directly with wind farms where miners are going in, they're going behind the meter, they give the generator a put option where they can put electricity to the mining load and avoid low prices. What this is going to look, well, right now, miners are just trying to get interconnected. We have de minimis balance sheets compared to our energy market counterparties, but we're going to get bigger. These balance sheets are going to get bigger, and then you're going to start to see generation and mining load inside of the same entity. And that's really cypherpunk, because you can't shut that off. They can't turn that off on the grid. It's a whole different energy optimization profile. It's economically stronger. It's a stronger signal to Bitcoiners. It's going to happen inevitably because it makes economic sense. Energy companies call us. Let's do some business, but it's good for Bitcoin in general. It's going to be an exciting future.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys all for coming here. Thank you to these guys.
Thank you, Miami, for the last 3 years in this amazing city. The whole world shut down, but Miami welcomed us with open arms. We want to show Bitcoin to the whole world. We are taking the conference on the road to set the stage for Bitcoin in a new city. Nashville. Bitcoin 2024 is coming to Nashville in Tennessee, a city that is known as a music and freedom city. Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville from July 25th to 27th.